So I have a multi-computer system. You can see there's quite a lot of screens going on there, and there's also two computers that are hidden. So what we do as film composers basically takes a lot of computer processing power. We're kind of at the cutting edge of music technology. So I'm just going to sort of delve into a few things for you guys today that you can take away and apply to your tech setups. So let's just get into it first of all. So you'll notice a few things here. I have a beautiful Nord stage keyboard, which is full size, 88 notes. Now you don't have to have a full size keyboard. You could have a smaller version of 49 key, perhaps, or a 61 key. So basically what we've got is the keyboard, the MIDI keyboard, which I said can be basically any keyboard that's connected to the main computer. Now the main computer is actually sitting inside one of those black boxes there, hidden outside of view. It's a Mac Pro 12-core machine that has 128 gigabytes of RAM in it, so it's the most powerful computer on the planet, basically. On the other side, also hidden out of view, down there in that little cupboard, is another Mac Pro. This time only a 6-core, 64 gig of RAM, but still a pretty powerful computer. Neither of them have screens, but they're both connected to these two Thunderbolt screens here in front of me sitting. And those two Thunderbolt screens are then sitting, or connected, sorry, to this, it's gone a bit fuzzy there, to this screen here, the Raven, which is actually a touch-sensitive screen that I use as a mixer. And also I can use it to basically use it as a touch-sensitive screen for anything that I need. Oh yeah, I've also got an older iMac over here, a 2010 iMac with 32 gigabytes of RAM. And over here I've got a laptop which has 16 gigabytes of RAM and 2011 MacBook Pro. So fair amount of computers going on there, and they're all connected together on a network via this guy, the Linksy. You can see that they're all four computers are connected via an Ethernet cable, which puts them all on the same network and means that I can use all four computers and their processing power to kind of combine into one, so that I'm basically spreading my processing load across four computers. Okay, so we'll delve into how that actually works with the software and all that stuff in a second. You'll notice I've got a TV screen up there as well. It's not a computer, it's connected to the computer via HDMI. I've got two big speakers. I've got this big one over here and another big one over there. They're Dyne Audio active speakers, really nice speakers, beautiful low end. Basically anything that I listen back to on those speakers gives me an idea of what it might sound like in a cinema, in a theatre. So it's got a subwoofer built into them, get really lovely low ends and really nice top ends. However, sometimes this can be misleading. I do a lot of work for television as well, and unfortunately people listening back to the music on their televisions don't often listen back through speakers that beautiful and that powerful. So that's why I have the two little speakers. You can see these two little guys here, which are actually passive speakers. There's an amplifier sitting underneath at the back there. A couple of other things is we've got this audio interface here. So the computer, the main computer, the big 12-core Mac Pro computer, is connected to this one and is basically processing all my audio. So if I did want to bring a singer in or a cellist in and record them, plug that microphone straight into this. It'll process all the audio and then put it back into the computer so that I can do with it there whatever I like. So that's what that guy does. It also lets me toggle between my sets of speakers. So if I press the A, I can hear it through my big speakers. If I press the B, I can hear it through those little TV speakers. And if I press C, I can actually hear it through my headphones, which I've just got sitting up there waiting to be used. So that's kind of it, really. That's the basic kind of setup. I have missed one thing, which is actually these Universal Audio Satellite Thunderbolt boxes. And what they do is they process all of my EQs and compressors and limiters and basically all of my audio processing plugins. So those guys are connected to the main computer, and I'll show you how they work a bit later on, but they basically control all of the EQs and those kinds of things. So that's kind of the basic setup. What happens with film music is we use a software called a digital audio workstation, a DAW, also known as a DAW. So you can have, there are many DAWs that exist. The one that I use is called Logic, and we're up to Logic version number 10 or number X. However, I've had colleagues that use other software. Cubase is another one. Digital Performer is another one. Pro Tools is another one. They're the kind of the main ones. Logic is sort of an industry standard. I would recommend going with Logic only because most people use that, and if there ever were a situation where you needed to share files with a colleague, a co-composer or somebody who's working for you, it's often easier if you're all using the same software. So Logic is basically where everything happens. You can buy it from the App Store for $299. It's pretty amazing. So let me show you how it works. So first of all, I launch Logic, and it happens to be down here in my dock on my touch screen. So I'm going to launch Logic X, Logic Pro X. Now it's going to start up and ask me what I want to do. I'm just going to, for now, create an empty project and show you how it can start working. Now, first thing that comes up by default is something that asks me to choose an audio track or a software instrument track. Now, one of the great things about today's technology is that we don't necessarily need to have an orchestra hiding in our cupboards that we can pull out and compose with. We can use something called virtual instruments. So these virtual instruments are actually recordings of real orchestras, and they've been turned into what's called samples, packaged up, and you can purchase these as third-party plugins, which you can insert into Logic and use to create your music. Now, clearly, it's not a real orchestra. Doesn't sound quite as realistic and as live and as amazing as a real orchestra would, but it can get you out of trouble. And in the right hands, it can certainly sound almost as good. And sometimes on smaller budget projects, this is what will end up being in the final result. Sometimes it might be re-recorded with an orchestra. Now, Logic, when you purchase it for its $299 price, comes with some really basic, pretty dodgy virtual instruments. Let me show you a couple of them. So it comes up and I choose that I want a software instrument and hit create. And it creates a track here in my Logic session. Then I go down and I need to insert an instrument plugin. Okay, so insert an instrument plugin, and a drop-down list will come up of some instruments that I want to insert. So basically I go to the Apple instruments and I choose whichever instrument I like. I'm going to choose a vintage clavinova, perhaps. Let's choose that one. Okay, and up it pops. That's the instrument that comes through. Now, I've got this keyboard here, which is connected to my computer via USB. Just playing some notes on my keyboard that actually have nothing to do with this keyboard. Like I said, it could be a plastic piece of rubbish. As long as it's connected and works as a MIDI controller with your main computer, you're using the instruments inside the computer. Now, these are the sounds, as I said, that come with Logic. Now, say I've I've decided I really like that sound and I want to record something, what I can do is I'll move that over onto my other screen just to get it out of the way. And I hit this record button up here in Logic, and away I go. Okay, and there it is. Now, clearly that's the default tempo. I could actually change the speed. I've just gone up here and I'm just going to change the speed to something much faster. And now when I play it back, much faster. Or perhaps I want to change the speed much slower than the original recording. Just there you go. Let's sort of go back to roughly where we were. I'll just type in 120, which is where it started. And I can name this track. I'm going to call it Clavinova. And that's great. So what I can do now is I click the little plus button up here in the corner, which gives me a new instrument, new software instrument track. And I say, right, I don't actually want the same instrument anymore. I'm going to choose a different one. Let's do a synth, some kind of synthesizer. Rightio, so it's going to bring up this weird looking instrument, and now it's going to sound, okay, it's this kind of instrument. So we can play back our original. Right, and then I can layer it on top. Now, what I just did then actually was a mistake. I actually hadn't hit record, and I'm thinking, oh, that was my perfect take. I really want that. Well, that's okay. There's a button here that says capture the recording I just made, even though the ticker wasn't on. Boom, there it is, ready to go. Now, as you can hear, the instruments that come with Logic, they're not great. In fact, there's no way you could really orchestrate an orchestra with these sounds. You can certainly get started and you can certainly play around and have a bit of fun. What you need to do now is spend a lot of money investing in what's known as third-party plugins. So these are made by other companies, not the people that make Logic. That works with Logic, but there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these companies that go out there. They make beautiful recordings of orchestras all around the world, turn them into samples, package it up into these buyable packages that us composers can buy. Install it on your computer, and then what you can do is, instead of loading these instruments, when I go to my add instrument library, my add instrument option, now I can drop down and another menu. Once you've installed it, another menu pops up with all these new sounds. Some of these sounds are actually orchestral sounds, some are guitar sounds, some are synth sounds, whatever it is that I've happened to have bought. There's libraries, virtual libraries of literally everything from orchestral music right down to synths and voices, choirs, percussion, electric guitars, and so forth. In fact, let's bring up a guitar. So it brings up something that looks quite different to the other one, and I'm going to choose, here's a nice guitar that I bought. It's called an arch top. Right, so now that sounds more like a guitar. I'm not really doing this very well. Okay, now that's just how it comes out of the box, but now I can go in there, I can fiddle with all the knobs, I can change the tone of the sound, I can add distortion. You know, if I go here for a second, it's going to be really loud because distortion is always really loud, but now So, you know, once you've kind of got these instruments up, you can really fiddle around with them, you can add effects to them and so forth. I don't like that, so I'm going to delete it, for example, and I'm going to choose, I'm going to scroll through my list. In fact, change my mind, I want a drum kit. Load in my drum kit, and let's turn this guy up again. Here we go. Literally just played in a drum track. Now, I didn't record that. Damn, that was a really great take. That's okay. I can hit that record capture button and it's got it. So literally any instrument you can think of, there is a virtual instrument for. Now, the limitations of this is that what I've done for you today is how it would work on a one computer setup. So you buy your laptop, you buy a iMac or whatever it is, you invest that money into buying a computer, you invest into buying Logic, then you invest into buying, you know, a couple of these libraries, these really nice third-party plugins that sound nicer than the stock standard ones that come with Logic. Now, the problem is you load up all of these instruments. At the moment, I've only got, what, like... 3. You can only see 3 tracks there. That's fine. It's going to play back just fine. But if you're working on a big orchestral score, you could have hundreds of tracks. And trust me, it doesn't take long for all of these virtual instruments to start eating up your computer's processing power. Now, what I didn't mention is when I purchased these boxes, I should just keep it here so you can see it. When I purchased these, this is a synth, but it could be a library of orchestral instruments or whatever. When I purchased these, I need to install them onto the computer, but clearly a computer's hard drive is not that big. In the best case scenario, it's 1 terabyte, and that's for your entire computer to run. That's not a lot. This one box could be up to 1 terabyte. Now, I've actually got about 5 terabytes worth of these virtual instruments, from orchestras to rock to jazz to all kinds of instruments. Now, I can't put all of that on my computer's hard drive. It's going to chew up all the power and the computer won't run properly. So what I have to do is put them on extremely fast external drives that are connected via Thunderbolt cable to my computer. Now, they're all hidden at the back there, away out of sight. You don't really need to see them, but you need to find the fastest possible drive that you can. I'm using solid state drives, which have no moving parts and are super, super fast, the fastest kind of drive on the planet at the moment. And they're connected to my computer using Thunderbolt 2 cables, which are much faster than regular USB cables. So that's really important to get your head around. Now, the next thing is sometimes you need more than one computer. Most times you need more than one computer. To get started at your guys' level, and I certainly started out with just one computer, but when you're working on really, really large projects, let's put this away, like I said, it doesn't take much to chew up your computer's processing power. So what I have is a thing called Vienna Ensemble Pro. Okay, it's a big fancy name for basically a piece of software that hosts my instruments on another computer and connects them all via a network. So what happens is I've got 4 computers, as I showed you before. Each one of them has this host, this Vienna Ensemble Pro, installed on the computer. Now, what I do is I load my virtual instruments, so my 5 terabytes of orchestra. Rather than just loading that on one computer, I work out I'm going to spread it over 4 computers. So say I'm going to put about 1.5 terabytes on each computer. Or maybe if one computer is more powerful, I might put a bit more on that one and a bit less, say, on my laptop. So basically inside this host, this Vienna Ensemble Pro host, I load in maybe on one computer, I'm going to put all my orchestral instruments. And in fact, I have one computer, the 6-core machine, which is sitting underneath the desk here, which has 64 gigabytes of RAM. It just has my orchestra instruments. So it has winds, brass, and strings. That's all that computer does. On my iMac, which is sitting behind me, I have all my percussion instruments. So my taiko drums, my timpani drums, my mallets, my snare drums, triangles, all that stuff just on that computer, the one behind me. On my laptop, which is just over here in front of me here, I have all my synthesizers and my bass guitars. So I have upright bass, I have electric bass, I have synth bass, I have all my kind of synthy electronic-y sounds on that one. Then on my main computer, which is the one that I've been using so far and showing you guys, that has Logic installed on it. You don't have to install Logic on any of the others. They all connect back to this, what is known as a master computer. The other computers are known as slaves, okay? And they're all connected back to the master. You can still run things on your master, and I do. I run my guitars, I run some pianos, what else do I run? Some kind of non-Western instruments, some sort of shakuhachis and some flutes and things like that. What else do I run? I run a couple of like weird keyboard sort of effects and things like that. So I've kind of worked out how it works for the best spread across the computers, and have done that. Then they all connect via Ethernet, as I showed you before, via a network hub, and they all talk to each other. And so I can basically spread the load and connect all of the processing powers of the 4 computers together so that they all kind of go into the mix, and I've got a really powerful setup. A multi-computer setup, this is called. Okay, so it can still work with one computer, but you will hit a limit of processing power, and it just will start distorting, and it just won't play back properly. You'll get errors. And anyway, so that's kind of how it works. Now, in most traditional studios, you'll see a big mixing desk in front of you with lots of faders and how you can mix your music and get the right balance. So say I end up with 100 tracks in here. I've got strings, I've got brass, winds, percussion, some piano, some harps, some electric guitars, bass guitars, all going into this mix for a film that I'm working on. Then I've got to try and mix it and make it sound good. Rather than having a big mixer here taking up all my space, what I have is this touch screen, Raven it's called. So what I do here, once I've got my Logic session all set up, I can launch Raven on here, and what happens is it actually sets up, it becomes touch sensitive now, and it becomes a touch sensitive mixer. So now I can actually use this screen, these faders here, they become touch sensitive, and I might be turning up and down my string tracks and so forth using this, and whatever tracks I have in here automatically pops up on here. Right, so that's kind of the basic idea of how it all works. Let me just go in and actually kind of show you a little bit more about how we can, once we've got our tracks in there, how we can EQ them and get a decent sounding mix that you can use as your demos. All right, so what I've done is I've loaded in a Logic template. So I've come up with a Logic session that has all of my instruments listed in the order I like them. So I've got winds up the top, brass, percussion, piano, harps and strings and so forth. So I've listed it like it would be on a score. And I've saved this as a template so that I can keep coming back to it, and I sort of set it up once and then I can keep reusing it. So I've loaded that in. I've got the Raven mixer set up. So I've got 1,000 instrument tracks already laid up at my disposal whenever I want them. So at the moment, I'm just going to select a string sample, and this is what it sounds like. Playing on the keyboard, but I'm getting the string sound coming out. Pretty amazing. Now, if I decide, don't want strings, I actually want to shuffle all the way back up, and I want to use perhaps, I don't know, let's go with a clarinet, shall we? don't want a clarinet, maybe I want a bassoon. And I'm playing a bassoon. So you kind of get the idea, and you basically lay up all the different tracks that you want, and there you go, you start composing. And it can sound pretty nice. So basically, there's two ways that you can approach all of this music technology. Now, in Australia, we aren't Hollywood. We don't have massive budgets. We don't have massive films that rake in hundreds of millions of dollars. So usually you'll be approached with a budget, and that will determine whether all of your instruments stay what we call in the box. So you use all these instruments that you have here and try and make them sound as real as possible. Or what you do is you use this as a demo. So we've spoken about talking with directors and producers and discussing their ideas for the music and how to interpret that. So one really great way of making sure you're on track with something is to what we call mock it all up in here using these kind of fake instruments, making it sound as real as possible, sending it to them and saying, what do you think? They say, nah, scrap it. Okay, that's fine. No damage has been done, really. You haven't gone out and hired the orchestra. You haven't spent $100,000 on doing that and mixing it and so forth. You've only spent your time, which unfortunately is precious, but that's what happens as a composer. So you can do it that way. Now, sometimes for projects I've worked on, which are sort of big budget but not super big budget, you might sort of do half and half. So you might decide actually the pianos and the percussion instruments sound really fine using these fake instruments, but we really should re-record the strings and maybe the woodwinds. So you would organize a recording session just with those instruments and kind of layer on the new recordings on top of your sort of virtual instruments that you've programmed in. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. So what I'm going to do now is actually open up a session and sort of show you something that how it works in action. Okay, so what I've done is I've loaded in an actual session that I used for a cue from Winners and Losers. This has already gone to air. So basically what happens is I've got all my tracks in here and I've color coded them so I know which ones are which and so forth. I've got my image up here. Now, usually you'll get sent a video that's actually pretty grainy to keep the size of the video file down. Because the video has to run through your computer, you don't want a video that's like 30 gigabytes in size kind of putting a big strain on your computer, because you don't really need that good a quality. You just need something that's good enough, but maybe more like 1 gigabyte is better. So usually it comes out a little bit grainy. It certainly looks much better when it finally goes to air and it's been graded and all of that stuff. This hasn't been graded yet. That's another process in the post-production stage, which is after all the music has been delivered. So anyway, this was from the barn fire episode of Winners and Losers. Maybe you guys saw that. This is the session that I used for this. I've got all my instruments already loaded. So basically, yeah, what happens is I sequence in on the keyboard what I think I like. I have a meeting with the producer, and he says, oh, I like that, I don't like that, go back and change that. I have 2 days to go back. I initially have 4 days, right, to write 2 episodes worth of music, and there might be 10 to 20 cues in each episode. So I've got 4 days to do that. Then we have the meeting. I present everything. I bounce all of these out. So export them all out as audio files. So just to one track rather than having, 50 separate tracks. I reduce them all down to one file for each piece of music or each cue. And I send that to the music editor. She slots all of that into her Pro Tools session at her studio, and we all come together and have a meeting and we listen to it all in a row. We watch through the episodes, and then the producer says, I like this, I don't like this, change this, keep this, maybe try this, do that. So then I come back and I have 2 days to make those changes. So I open up these sessions again. So forget about the files that I've sent to the editor. I go back to these original sessions and then I start tweaking them. And once I'm happy with what I've done with those, I'll bounce out these again, export them out as single audio tracks, send those back to the music editor. We have another meeting. Okay, hopefully everything's been approved by then. Then I have to go back here, open this session up again, make any last minute changes, mix it, make sure all my levels are correct, listen back on the different speakers, make sure that that's all good. And then I actually have to create stems. So what that means is from these 50 tracks, I might have to reduce it to say 10 audio files. I might need all of my strings on one track, all of my guitars on another track, all of my bass guitars, all of my keyboards and so forth. So you might have, depending on the cue, you could have maybe just 3 stems, or maybe sometimes it could be up to 20 stems if it's a really large session. So those, each cue will have all these different instrument stems, which then I send to the mix engineer at a different studio. He takes all of those, puts it into his session, lays it up with all the sound effects and the dialogue. And in this particular episode, there was a lot of barn fire noise and flames and things falling from the roof. And he has to try and make all of the music and the sound effects work together. And that's why it's good to have these stems, because they can turn individual tracks up and down and they have more control over how it sort of mixes in with everything. So that's kind of how it works. So got the session here. Each individual track is able to be manipulated, and I can actually, if I hit A, automation, it brings up all of the volume. So I can actually go in and with my mouse I can do it, or I've got a foot pedal underneath here that can also control the levels of volume. Sometimes you might have a little mod wheel on a keyboard, or I can use the mouse here as well. Can use my trackpad. You can see that's moving things there as well. Where was I? Lost my spot. There we go. So I can go in and I can make certain bits louder, certain bits softer. I can do that with the mouse, or all of that's also connected up to my Raven, and I can do it all here with my hands here. And then each of these individual tracks, I can go in there, and over on this screen, I've got some of them loaded up. So each instrument has its own little kind of interface that you can sort of move around and, you know, put wherever you like. If I want to make it touch sensitive, I drag it down into this window and I can then kind of use my hands to control that. Otherwise, I can keep it up here and use my mouse. You know, and these things I can open up here and I can go in, I can tweak parameters, I can change the sound, I can, you know, there's effects racks, I can put in delays and echoes and all kinds of effects in there, or whatever I want. And the other really cool thing were these black boxes that are sitting over here. What they are third-party EQ and compressor plugins, basically. Now, Logic does come with stock standard EQs and compressors. Now, let me just pull one up. For example, let's see. I've got, which instrument is this? I've got this kind of weird bass kind of sound here. So if I click on the EQ, brings up this little window here. Now, you can see I've got actually quite a lot of that low, the top end out there, but I can start messing around with this. Oops, turn it on, might help. And this is actually going to change the sound of the tone. Can make it sound quite high pitched, or I can bring out more of certain frequencies. If I really want it to be bassy, I boost the low ends. If I don't want so much bass, I can actually get rid of all of them and just bring out more of the top end. So these come with Logic and are very powerful and very cool, but I also have some extra, better, more expensive ones sitting over in those black boxes, because these ones that come with Logic, again, are using the processing power inside Logic, and it can get, it can sort of drag things down a little bit. But those two black boxes over there, it happens all inside those boxes, so it frees up the processing power of my main computers. So what I can do exactly the way I loaded an instrument, there's a little slot just above it, which is called audio effects plugin. I just click on that one, and now instead of bringing up the stock standard one that comes with Logic, I because I've installed my really nice ones over here in those black boxes, they'll come up here in a separate list, and I can actually bring up these EQs, and they look a little bit nicer, a bit more vintage style. Basically, these EQs and compressors are actually modeled on old school analog EQs and compressors that used to exist as outboard gear, as external, basically little boxes that you'd put into racks and have to connect all of your instruments into so that you could EQ things manually. They had some really fantastic vintage sounds, and some people say that digital music's very harsh and that analog is much more real and human. So what they've done is kind of given us the best of both worlds. They've gone and sampled all these EQs and compressors and these lovely bits of machine and equipment that has a lovely tone to it, and turned them into plugins that you can actually use digitally in your software. So it gives a warmth, an analog warmth to your kind of synthesized sounds, which is very cool. And again, like I said, it doesn't use up the processing power of the computer because they're happening over there in that little box. So it takes a lot to get your head around how all of this works. It's certainly taken me years, and technology is moving so fast that once you've got your head around one thing, something else sort of comes onto the market and you've got to sort of get your head around that new thing as well. So as composers like myself, and probably many of you who started out literally by writing with pencil and paper and sitting at the piano, getting your head around the technology is tricky, and there's certainly a lot of hurdles to overcome and to make it all work and to use it in a professional setting. But hopefully some of this has helped give you a bit of an insight into what you need to do and what's required of a composer in a professional sense. When you're hired as a composer, someone calls you up and says, we want music for our film. They don't just want you to sit down and compose it with pencil and paper. They expect you to compose it, to record it, to program it in, to mix it, to master it, to basically do everything. And you need to have a studio, even a basic one, set up in order to do that. So hopefully this has helped.